Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Thrivalist Manifesto with Dr. G and Ben V. We are in Malafé Studios on Amsterdam Avenue in Washington Heights. And how about that intro music? This is the second time we use it, and it's like Earth, Wind, and Fire meets The Roots.
Eric B. and Rakim.
Eric B. and Rakim all wrapped in once. Yeah. We wanted everybody to get a little flavor in New York on the intro, and that's what it is. So today's topic, we're going to do a series on let's call it it's hard to describe it, but it's ELDOA, and it's like gaining some real traction now. And ELDOA is an acronym, and I'll go through what that means. But it's a series of postures, and I have to start by explaining a little history on it. So I was exposed to ELDOA, which is ELDOA, excuse me, and the English translation, the acronym is LOADS, LOADS, and it stands for Longitudinal Osteo-Articular Decoaptive Stretching. And in ELDOA, it's that translation in French. I was exposed about 14 years ago by the founder and researcher that developed this system. We're going to call it a system of postures, a system of exercises. Back in the late 1970s, while he was doing his residency, I believe. He's a very unique individual. His name is Dr. Guy Voyer, Voyer. He is from Marseille, France. I was introduced to him by one of my best friends, who's a performance coach from Montreal, Paul Gagne. And Paul told me, you got to meet this guy. He's unbelievable. He's a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon. He's an athlete. He's an osteopath. And he's teaching at a school here in Montreal. And I took a course with him. And so I met Dr. Voyer, went to take a course in Montreal with him, and his English was not that good, so he had a translator. And
what year was that?
I want to say we're in 2017. I want to say that it was 2005.
Okay.
So wow. It's been 12 years, maybe a little bit more. I have to check, but yeah. So I went to take a course with him, and it wasn't the first time that I was exposed to ELDOA, but what I was exposed to was, I thought that I had a pretty good grasp on anatomy and biomechanics, and I walked away, as many times I have had in my career. When you take something that blows you away, the first 24 to 48 hours, you're a little bit depressed, because I was like, God damn, I thought I was pretty good at what I do, and I got a lot to learn. But then you realize, you get excited, and you're like, okay, you know what? This is another door that's opening, and this is another way to step up my game, so to speak. So that was the feeling. And to this day, I still take courses with him. And that first 24 to 48 hours is, oh man, like I thought my game was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, long story short, get exposed to him.
So now this was in Montreal. So at this point, Guy Voyer had never taught or been in the United States.
No.
So in 2005, really, unless you had training in France or in Canada, in Montreal in particular, from somebody who speaks English very poorly, ELDOA was just not around.
It wasn't around. None of his principles were around. And he was basically a doctor that was an osteopath that was practicing and teaching in Canada and in France. So I got to know him a little bit, and we convinced him to put together a specific fellowship for a very small group of us that were involved in either a corporate fitness, or like myself, there was a few that were involved already working and preparing high-level athletes in athletic preparation, strength and conditioning, et cetera, et cetera.
Was Dr. Voyer working with athletes in Europe?
Yes. So his background is he's an orthopedic surgeon. He started off as a trainer when he was in medical school. So, and in Europe, particularly in France, you have to be licensed, what they call a license of a preparator for physical culture. So it's like a national license that you have to get in order to be able to actually train anyone, Joe Blow, to an athlete. So that's what he was doing, putting himself through medical school, and became an orthopedic surgeon. Quickly realized that even in Europe, he didn't really like the principles of Western medicine. It left too many unanswered questions for him. So he went to osteopathic school. And for the audience that doesn't know about osteopathy, Steve, can you enlighten them a little bit on osteopathy?
Sure. I mean, osteopathy actually has its roots here in the U.S.
Yes.
It goes back to a time when there was a lot more freedom to practice the healing arts in our country. So in the 1800s, there were a lot of burgeoning philosophies about health. And one of them was medicine. Another one was chiropractic in 1895. Another was just before that was I can't remember the name of the doctor who started osteopathy, but again, the principle was that osteo-articulations or joints. Articulations, where how bones and nerves and muscles come together, if they're out of alignment, it can interfere with normal function. In the chiropractic profession, that loss of osteo-articular
mobility integrity
would cause a neurological deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And in the osteopathic world, it was a very similar philosophy, only they felt that it was affecting blood flow, and they felt it was affecting other
visceral function,
more visceral function. But it turns out they were all right. Now, here in this country, in the middle of the century, I want to say in the 1940s, there was a big push for the medical profession to squash any healing art completely out of existence. And it was a very coordinated, concerted effort. It was proven in a court of law in 1974 that this was actually there were commissions on quackery in the medical profession to eliminate the existence of anything that was not under the guise of medicine. So
the beginning of the medical mafia.
Yeah, for the most part. And the chiropractic profession was able to hold on to their integrity and keep their profession. The osteopathic schools, however, decided to allow the medical establishment, the American Medical Association, to take over their education, their licensing, and all of their procedures. So now, if you go to an osteopathic school here in the U.S., there are some coursework you'll take in traditional osteopathy, which is very akin to chiropractic and those kinds of natural healing arts. But it's really no different than medical school, and you can become a neurologist, you can become a surgeon. Matter of fact, I think in California, if you have a DO degree, it's a de facto MD degree. So you could write MD after your name and DO.
Yeah.
So there are some places in the world. I know there's a school in Maine, an osteopathic school in Maine, that seems to try its hardest to hold on to some of the old traditions. But certainly in Europe, they've definitely been able to hold on to those principles a lot.
Yeah, they hold on to the principles. And basically, for the audience understanding, the osteopathic principles are respecting the fact that the body works as a whole global system. So you have to respect the entire physiological function.
The whole is greater than the sum of its
Correct,
parts.
100%. So back to Dr. Guy Voyer, he went to osteopathic school, and he decided that he wanted to do, there was a huge low back epidemic globally, right? As there still is. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to do his thesis on helping patients with low back. So he started taking a really deep dive into what the treatment modalities were at the time, what the anatomy of why the low back, you had low back dysfunction, low back pain, the biomechanics involved. And he found that most of the information was disjointed. It wasn't really looking at the body as a whole. So he and a few colleagues started putting together this system of postures or exercises. The other thing is that in osteopathy, they realized that the best therapist, the best doctor is the actual patient themselves. So you walk away with homework. You walk away with, this is what you have to do in order to, it's not uncommon for an osteopath to tell a patient, hey, you have to lose 10 kilos. And if the patient comes back and they haven't, they're like, hey, you didn't do what you were supposed to do it. How do you expect to get better?
Right.
Like, don't put the onus on me. The onus is on you.
Right.
So, and it's the same whether it's a mechanical injury or it's another type of systemic problem.
So would it be safe to say then, since going back to 2005 or even further, your relationship with Guy Voyer turned into not only a teacher-student relationship, but also a type of a friendship? I mean, you guys spent a lot of time. You've learned from him in a classroom setting, but you've also learned from him on a one-on-one setting. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, the best experience that I've had has been, we worked together. We worked in Montego Bay in a resort for about 5 years. We would work like 2 to 4 weeks out of the year, where he was treating there was golfers there was recreational athletes that would go there. It's a pretty high-end resort. And then I would do all the exercise protocol for those patients and, put together the protocols based on his treatment and his recommendations. So I really understand his philosophy, and I really understand why the ELDOA was developed and the benefits that are completely outside of the initial low back project, let's call it.
In other words, if the focus is just on low back pain, we can say, all right, well, this is the mechanism.
Correct.
But there seems to be additional, and we're going to go into that, what the additional benefits of these postures can be. Mm-hmm. Can you give us just a brief breakdown as to what are the ELDOA postures? When we say, when I hear the word posture, I'm thinking yoga,
right?
Pilates,
Yeah.
So where does ELDOA come in?
So in order to understand the principles of ELDOA and the postures, the audience has to understand that the body works as a whole. It's global. So that anatomically and biomechanically, there's a link between the top of your head, the apex, the crown of your head, and the bottom of your foot.
And what is that link?
The links are different myofascial links, which is the fascia. That's an entire other subject, but the easiest way to understand that is that all the connective tissue, including the muscles, the nerves, the tendons, the ligaments, the aponeurosis, they're all in link from the top of your head to the bottom of your foot. And that when you elicit a movement and or a position in space, there is a direct link and effect all through that entire those myofascial chains.
It's funny. That my background is in neurology, right? So
Yes.
I did a 3-year postgraduate program in neuroscience, or technically what we call functional neurology.
Mm-hmm.
And if you tried to explain everything the human body can do, especially in athletics, mm-hmm. if you try to explain it with neurotransmission, meaning how a signal travels through a nerve in the brain and the spinal cord to the extremities, it mathematically doesn't make sense. The idea that you can run full speed, cut on a dime, reach out one-handed, time a football to be caught in a reverse, 360-degree leap and catch in one hand. That there's so much happening in that product, or even just to play a Mozart concerto, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much going on. The speed at which information travels with what is traditional neural transmission or propagation along a nerve, which at its fastest is 80 to 120 meters per second, which again sounds pretty fast, but when we're talking about these very complex activities that the human body can do, it can't be explained mathematically just by neurotransmission. And years ago, before I ever met you, before I ever heard of Guy Voyer, there was a theory that the transmission of information can occur almost instantaneously through a communication system that's extraneural, meaning not involving the nervous system, and the explanation of that would be through the fascia.
Correct.
So that, just brings things full circle for me, where the bottom of the foot and the top of the head can communicate almost instantaneously.
Yeah, it's faster than the nervous system.
Right.
And there's a lot of research going on in that, because it's, for a while, anatomists and biomechanists weren't really regarding the fascia, and it was lost. It was lost, I want to say prior to World War II, all the anatomists and biomechanists and medical doctors respected the fact that the fascia played a huge role in the human body. And then for that period of time, up until recently, it was lost. And to your point, with regards to the ELDOA, which we'll talk about more, the Newtonian model of biomechanics makes no sense mathematically. The same way that what you were referring to, the neurotransmission, just if you look at the pelvis alone, just walking around, the way that the structure of the pelvis, there's no way that mathematically it can support the amount of weight and load of all the organs moving around unilaterally, one leg at a time.
Right.
It makes no sense.
Right.
Mathematically. So there's a big school of thought, and you can call it a new science, that's called biotensegrity, which we'll do a podcast on, and we'll interview sort of the father here in the U.S. of biotensegrity, who's an orthopedic surgeon himself. His name is Dr. Stephen Levin. And through biotensegrity, very simply, they understand and they respect the fact that there's links from the top of the head to the bottom of the foot, and that those links communicate via the fascia. And the fascia is controlled via biotensegrity with forces of compression and tension always. What the audience has to understand is that the only time that we're never going to move, even when you sleep, even when you're sitting still, there's always movement going on in your body, is when you're dead. Then there's no movement going on. So
even when you're sleeping and you're
your heart's beating,
still,
your lungs are moving,
your ribs are moving, the articulations of your ribs to your spine are moving because your ribs are going back and forth with respiration.
Right.
Just to kind of, for the audience to get an idea of what the word fascia is, and I've heard you describe this before. When you cut up a piece of chicken and there's different parts of the meat that is separated by this thin film that we've all seen in our chicken. Well, that thin film of covering is contiguous throughout the entire body, from the bottom of the foot to the top of the head.
Right.
And it connects virtually every single organ, vessel, nerve, every single component of the body is linked by this fascia.
Yeah, everything is linked via the fascia, and the fascia is primarily made up of water. So if you think about that flow of water from the top of your head to the bottom of your foot, that's communicating at super high speeds, like you said, and is adjusting the forces of compression and tension always. So now we understand that it's one big link. We understand that it's connected.
Let's not forget also that in the human body, water takes on a very different kind of principle. The H2O, like the H is up at the top and the two O's are at the bottom. Well, there's a positive and negative polarizing or polarized aspect to that. And in the human body, the integrity of that electrical component of water is very important. And there are things in our water that can actually reduce how can reduce the electrical integrity of water. Without going into too much detail, and maybe we'll do a podcast on this in the future.
We need to
there's
on water.
Things like bromide and fluoride and things that we do to our water from a processing standpoint can actually impact the quality of that water and the water's ability to allow these tissues to function the way they're supposed to.
I think that's a really good point, Stephen. It's relevant to what we're talking about and we should remind ourselves, you and I, in future podcasts, to keep hammering home the importance of hydration and to talk about it, because in osteopathy, and I'm sure it's the same in chiropractic, but in osteopathy, they understand the importance of water. And when I've read at least a dozen times that's nature's best medicine, and now we're going back to understanding that everything that's not water is food. So if you're drinking lemonade, that's not water, right. That's food. If you're drinking juice, that's food. If you're drinking tea, that's food. If you're drinking coffee, that's considered food. Water is water, and then it has a different effect on hydrating the cell, what's called intracellular hydration, and hydrating the outside of the cell, which is called extracellular hydration, which is important to the integrity of the fascia, which is important to the integrity of the communication in the fascia, which is important to the integrity of the compression and the tension. Where I'm going with this is that you want to help yourself as an athlete or a recreational athlete. First thing you need to do is to make sure you're hydrated. First thing. Yeah. And on a consistent basis. So back to the ELDOA. So Dr. Guy Voyer decided to do as his thesis on low back pain. After he took a deep dive, he said there was no real system for the patient to elicit a response within the articulation in the spine. He said, how can I affect different articulations? He says, well, I'm going to look at it anatomically. I'm going to look at the fascia, and then I'm going to look at it biomechanically. I'm going to look at the role of the position of the body, and I'm going to look at it neurologically, and I'm going to look at how can I elicit that maximum response in the shortest period of time. And that was the birth of ELDOA. ELDOA is a system of postures whereby the person puts themselves in a position and they actively begin a contraction that causes tension on the fascia. And based on the position that they're in, meaning their upper body, their upper limbs, lower limbs, their spine, it causes a response at a particular segment in the spine or at a particular articulation. So anywhere from the C012 to S1, S2 to the articulation of the hip to the articulation of the glenohumeral joint.
So the proper use of the ELDOA technique can enhance the integrity of the joints at very specific levels of the spine as well as the extremities. So if you have a hip problem, a shoulder problem, a spinal problem, let's say you have a L4, L5, herniated disc due to an injury or something like that, there are specific postures you can do with the ELDOA technique that target maximally that particular segment to create, I think the word you used was decoaptation, or what I like to call kind of like active decompression.
Correct. Active decompression. And before I forget, I just heard a podcast, and I think it was Joe Rogan, and he was talking to Rob Wolf, who's one of the guys that's well known in the paleo world, right? He's like, he's a food guru in the paleo world. And they got on the subject of decompression, and I guess they both had low back problems and different methods of decompression, from those inversion boots to decompression tables to passive decompression, having a therapist actually try to decompress
It's all passive. It's all being done
Correct.
to you either by another person or by gravity or by a machine, as opposed to ELDOA is an active decompression.
And the difference here, and it's important because I've heard different people talking about ELDOA and talking about decompression and traction. The difference is that you are having a neuromuscular re-education. That's how I define it. So when you have a passive decompression or traction, your brain is not learning. Your brain is not accepting that as a new position. And so you feel good for a little while. Generally, guys are like, yeah, I feel pretty good for a little while, but then it goes back to, or it may get worse.
Right.
When you actively decompress, you are eliciting an education or a plasticity in the brain.
And I just from previous conversations we've had, I would probably add hormesis into that, where the postures create a leverage. It utilizes gravitational stress and leverage and active contraction in order to get the body to take that stressor that you're putting on the vertebrae in a very controlled way. By the way, when I say stressor, it's a very controlled stressor, and that's the point. So that allows the body to then respond more appropriately and position the muscles, ligaments, tendons, joints, fascia, everything in a more favorable way. Correct.
Yeah. And so, people will look at the postures, and many practitioners of yoga or Pilates will be like, yes, I see it. It's stretching. It's not stretching.
Right.
It's not stretching because
that's what I was going to say. This is not yoga. I mean, it's a series of postures. People can say, oh, yeah, you could do yoga, you could do ELDOA, you could... No.
No, it's completely different. It's completely different. And the difference lies in that there are progressions to it, number one. Number two is that aside from having very specific positions for the articulations relative to where you want to target, it's not general, is that it has an effect on the nervous system. It has an effect on the endocrine system. It has an effect on the overall physiology. I mean, the benefits are innumerable from what we've seen over time, and now we're starting to document some of those.
So now you've been working over the years with a lot of very high level athletes, and what I found, I just think high performing athletes are people who really know a lot about themselves and they really care about what works for them. So if they're a superstitious baseball player that thinks, there's some kind of a ritual he has of shaking some, rolling bones on the floor or something like that, it's going to help. They're going to
sacrificing your chicken.
Yeah. They're going to do whatever it takes, no matter what. They're not putting any thought. They don't care about the rationale. They don't care about anything.
No.
Does it work? And I think what you've experienced and your that tight-knit group of people that you've kind of were a part of and still are a part of, and matter of fact, some of them are doing some crazy research all around the world using MRIs and ELDOA and functional MRIs and things like that, which is, again, topic for another day. But I think what you guys have experienced is there's a demand for this. What are the athletes saying to you about ELDOA and what it does for them?
So there's two parts to that response. One is what I'm seeing as a coach and a therapist that's working closely with the athletes. When you think about it, when you go to work with athletes, you have a toolbox, and that toolbox includes, different scientific principles that you use, different, methods that you use that are proven. You have your experience in there, and you have a certain amount of art, sprinkled with art, being able to understand how to utilize those three components that are very important. And then within that, you have other tools that you use, different warm-up routines, different recovery stuff, different
nutrition,
strength protocols, utilizing different pieces of equipment, on and on and on. So those are all tools that you have in your toolbox. I can honestly say, in my experience, in my career, this is the most powerful overall tool that I've used in preparing an athlete or in doing any kind of rehabilitation with an athlete.
So think about how powerful of a statement that is, because you're talking about, you got 20 plus years working with athletes, being a strength coach, helping boxers and hockey players, and it's just incredible the array of people that you've worked with, and that this, because again, you have a lot of tools, right? You have powerlifting, you have Olympic lifts, you have training on the track. There's so many things that you can use. This is the most powerful.
This is it. I mean, like I said, people will look at it and they'll go, "Yeah, that's kind of a really."
That's what you think.
Stretching.
Wait a minute, you feel it's most powerful. Do you have clients or athletes who feel the same?
100%. I've gotten. Just the other day, I text a former football player who we'll have on the show at a certain point, and I said, "How's it going with the ELDOA?" I flew out to San Francisco, and I probably showed him and his wife and his daughter, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 different postures based on the evaluation, his history of injuries, his sport, what he needed, what he did. His response to me is game changer.
Yeah.
Does it every day? Game changer. I had a golfer that I worked with 4 years ago. Herniation, L3, L4, L4, L5, L5S1. As a result of golf, just the sport. It's what we call an overuse injury, right? Years of hitting a ball one-sided, compressing the lumbar spine, getting the hips tight on one side, et cetera, right? Gave him ELDOA for those segments, plus a few other ones. He was diligent with it. X-rays, no herniations.
You actually saw a change in the
position of the disc.
Position of the disc on imaging. Probably they used MRI or something like that to look at the disc. That's fascinating.
Yeah, we've had athletes that have, I've given ELDOA for recovery and or some type of hip pain or thoracic pain, and they've said to me, something, I had an issue at my elbow, or I had an issue just above the knee, and since I've been doing the ELDOA, it's gone.
It's funny you said that, how diligent they have to be. So I did a consultation with one of your clients once, and I walked into the room, we were talking, he was having an acute issue. You had worked with him for a lot of years. Matter of fact, he's also a dear friend of yours. And I walked out of the room, I had to do something. I came back, and he was just doing his postures.
Yeah.
And he knows he knows them by heart. He knows which ones to do and this particular person was in his late 40s, a physical specimen, absolutely shredded, definitely very fit. And it was just great to see somebody be able to apply. And these postures are not, I've done them. I've gone through the process with you several times, and I don't know them to do them myself at home yet. I have to do them with repetition.
Correct.
And this particular client of yours, just knew them all because he's been doing them.
Yeah, he's had a few injuries that, he's an actor, and he's suffered a few injuries on set and has had a few surgeries, and as a result is dealing with the ramifications of those surgeries, and he realizes the power of doing the ELDOA. And I don't write a program now that doesn't include at least 1 or 2 ELDOA postures. Some we use as a warm-up, most of them we use as recovery, but, and for Mr. and Mrs. Smith that are out there listening that spend a good amount of their time either walking in the streets of New York on hard sidewalks or sitting in front of a computer, ELDOA is a game changer for this epidemic that we have that we call teschnique with kids and with students because of computers and smartphones. This is a game changer because, the benefits, like I said, are innumerable. And you look at it and you think, oh yeah, that's kind of a sophisticated stretching, but it's not, because there's components of neurology involved, there's components of biochemistry involved, and there's components of just normal physiological function that are involved. And I can tell you that I've seen the benefits of all of them. You know, we've had several athletes that we've seen in the last couple of years that have come in with multiple concussions. And as far as their rehab protocol is concerned, ELDOA has been the biggest component.
Yeah, knowing what I know now, there's no concussion rehabilitation program that I would recommend without ELDOA as being a part of it. I mean, the feedback the nervous system gets, feedback that the nervous system needs in order to not only function optimally in a game situation, but also to recover from an injury that involves that which controls all of those joints and muscles, which is the brain. And like we said, there are members of that tight-knit group of people that you work together with in this, that are doing research on that level. And we want to share that research, and it's not done yet, but when it is, we hope to be the first to bring it out to discuss, because
we will.
I think, like you said, game changer.
Game changer.
Without a doubt. I see ELDOA. I see ELDOA, and again, with the proper understanding being brought into every major collegiate institution of sports and athletics, and there's just a lot of application here when it comes to
there's nothing like it. There really isn't. I've looked at everything. I've looked at different mobility methods. I've looked at everything from active isolated stretching to different types of PNF stretching that involve the nervous system, to different types of mobility systems that are out there now that use different movements and mobility, and they're all good tools. Don't get me wrong, but all encompassing like ELDOA, it doesn't exist because of what you said. And the concussion rehab is a very good example. The concussed athlete is a good example, because you take an athlete that's had multiple concussions and they walk into your office, and whether they have symptoms or not have symptoms, there's different components that have been affected, or different factors that have been affected. Everything from the awareness, they don't know where they are in space, to proprioception, which is a fancy word that just means information. So the information that's traveling from the brain down and from their body
and
up.
By the way, let me just bring something in here, just on a side note from a book that I'm reading, and some other research that I've read recently. And we think I forget who said this, and I'm not taking credit for this in any way. I think it was George Clinton who said, free the mind and your ass will follow. And this principle is, free your ass and your mind will follow. It's kind of like the idea that your mind doesn't necessarily control your body, and your body doesn't control your mind. It's all one body mind. And let's, I don't want to go too far into the spiritual side, but I will say that research has been done where people who've had Botox injections into their frown lines, they basically take a neurotoxin and they paralyze the muscles of frowning so they don't have wrinkles. But psychologists have done research with them and found that their ability to experience empathy is altered with Botox injections when they paralyze muscles of frowning. Another study showed that the Wonder Woman posture, standing, with your hands on your hips, standing up tall.
Linda Carter,
a.k.a.
1970s.
Right. That posture, for just a short period of time, can increase testosterone, a power hormone, in women by 20%.
That's huge.
So what we're saying is the posture of the body, like you said, drives the brain, the nervous system, the endocrine system, which is the hormone system. And when you think about what people are going through today, just at their desk and with the texting and the computers and the low T, and it's foundational, and that's we believe, of course, ELDOA. Many of our podcasts will be labeled as foundational, and those are foundational means that the concepts in that podcast are going to run through every podcast we do in the future. And this is definitely, ELDOA is definitely foundational. And like we said, we're going to have to split up ELDOA into several podcasts.
Yeah, we're going to really dive deep into it because it's that important.
So this is the intro.
This is the intro.
And this is great stuff. So with that being said, this is the end of this episode. We want to thank you guys for listening. We really enjoyed talking about this material. We'd love to hear your feedback. And until next time, I'm Dr. G with Ben V, and this is the Thrivalist Manifesto.
Later.